Okay, hello everyone. We are going to we're moving on to Blake's Songs of Innocence and Experience, which are his best known poems, I think, at least as a collection, and certainly individually as lyric poems. These are often taught, at least to English students. I don't think they're taught so much in Canada, which is a bit of a shame, but well known in undergrad circles at any rate, if not in schools. And I think you can see from where we finished off last time, his poems, There Is No Natural Religion and All Religions Are One. If you followed what I said last time, Blake is very much influenced by Locke's notion of the mind as a tabula rasa. And when we come to his Songs of Innocence and Experience, the best way to understand what he means by those two states is to understand Lockean psychology there. And as I said to you last time, one of the reasons that Blake regards all religions to be one, or there to be no natural religion, is because he thinks that human nature has no moral nature. He takes Locke's notion of the mind as a blank slate and implicitly rejects the idea of an inherent moral nature, which means he rejects C.S. Lewis's idea of the Tao. And if you haven't been in my classes where I've talked about that, the Tao is basically the notion that every age has acknowledged that there is, objectively speaking, in human nature, certain moral standards commonly accepted and transmitted in every major religion. And Lewis shows this in The Abolition of Man. If you're interested, go back and look at his treatise, The Abolition of Man, where he demonstrates, at least in the second chapter when he describes the way, that the same, obvious differences, but you can attribute a common frame of reference between Christianity, Islam, Judaism, Confucianism, Taoism, and so on. So major religions, they all have certain moral prescripts, and they seem startlingly familiar. Lewis would also have said that it's also true of the ancient world. So the Greco-Roman, the pagan world that the Apostle Paul confronted when writing his treatise to the Romans. And in the first chapter, when he says that the attributes of God are known to the pagans, and therefore they're without excuse, because it's seen from the way in which things are made. He's not just asserting that, he's observing that they already do have a sense of right and wrong. And the dominant philosophy in Paul's day is probably Stoicism, decidedly moralistic, and dependent on an idea that humanity does have a moral nature. It just assumes it, because everybody assumes it. And so Lockean psychology, which suggests that the mind is a blank slate, doesn't specifically address our moral feelings, our moral sensibilities, but it's pretty much the same postulate that we find with Descartes and Locke, which is to take humanity as if there were no moral nature. And this is deeply problematic. And Blake himself doesn't like it. So much so that he reacts against it. But at the same time, my argument last time was that he presupposes Lockean psychology and just reacts against it. This can't be right because of this. Because we have moral feelings in ourselves, which the poet is aware of, and the poet is going to lead us to acknowledge. The problem is he just hasn't seen more deeply enough to recognize that his presuppositions are the problem. And you can't fix something that's fundamentally problematic. And this is my critique of the Romantics in general. They assume the presuppositions of the Enlightenment and then presume to correct them while still assuming the presuppositions. So they don't fix the problem. Now, the way in which they do that is through means of what they call the imagination, which provides images which appeal to our moral sensibilities, etc. So it tries to reintroduce a moral framework where it presupposes that there is none because it recognizes that we need one. But why should it not just question whether Locke's framework is wrong to begin with? I don't know. But whether you are in England and assume Locke's psychology, or whether you're on the continent and assume Descartes', you have the same problem. Descartes is little different and little better. His cogito is likewise the ghost of the machine. Very mechanistic. Both of them deny not just a biblical account of human nature, but a religious account of human nature. And so they're not very realistic, but they are the dominant mode in which the Western mind works since the early 17th century. This is a problem for us in the humanities. We have inherited a generation upon generation that have effectively used either Lockean psychology or Cartesian views of human nature and its epistemology, and we simply have to assert that or observe that nobody believes what the philosophers teach on this. Nobody. Because they all appeal to injustice as if it were a real thing, which is C.S. Lewis's point. Every kid in the playground knows what "that's not fair" means. Every kid. So with that in mind, that's the critique, and we'll have to come back and see Romanticism tries to rectify the problems of the Enlightenment, but it inherits its presuppositions. So where is that going to lead us? It's going to lead us to Romanticism as a form of religion. That's where it's going to lead us. And it's more problematically going to use the language of Christian teaching to convey it. It's got an inherited vocabulary, and it will use it in its own images. And here's an example. Songs of Innocence and Experience. Things like the Lamb. The Lamb has extraordinary resonance in Christian thought. Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. The lamb that's used on the Day of Atonement or whatever. You sacrifice a lamb unblemished at whatever, right? These are stock Christian images and even sensibilities, and Blake will use these, thereby sounding Christian, and use them to uphold the moral nature of humanity against the Enlightenment. But does it have all the resonances of Christianity, or does it jettison some? And I'm going to submit that it gets rid of some. And one of the indications of it is that it thinks that all religions are one. Which Christianity expressly speaks against. And so do the others. They're also not happy to be, we're not happy to have Tashlan, as it says in the last battle, Lewis's last battle. We don't want a mixture of Aslan and other gods. That's not going to work. But there is an element in which they do share a common moral framework, and so in a sense they have some common ground, but it's very different in other ways, and you must not delimit them into being fundamentally the same thing. But these are songs of innocence and experience, and note the subtitle here, which is important, showing the two contrary states of the human soul. The first state is the blank slate. The second is that of experience, and the experience may be bad. What's useful about it now, when they're written at different times, and the one was not set up to be written the same way as the other. I think they must be read. They should be read in conjunction, although they are conceived independently. And you can see this when you look at them as companion poems. So, for example, when we look at the lamb, we can see its counterpart in the tiger. And we can hear the echoing green, that we have a counterpart in the echoing green here as well. We have two Chimney Sweeper songs So often explicitly referring to the same subject, and you can see that the change between the one and the other. So that's how I'm going to read it, rather than go through all the innocence and then go to the experience. I'm going to go bounce back from one to the other. But let's go to the Song of Innocence introduction, and then I will go to the Song of Experience introduction, and I'll make comments along the way. First thing I want you to note about all of the Songs of Innocence experience is the diction is very simple. No complex words here, and very childlike in its choice of words. Very evocative, and written in poetic form in a way that sounds a lot like children's verse, and probably modeled on Isaac Watts. You know Isaac Watts by chance? Divine and Moral Song for children. Divine and Song, easy language for the use of children. Divine and Moral Songs for children. There we go. Oops, that's not going to help. See if I can find a short one here. For children. These are not much read these days or used, but they were used in churches at one point. Is this a PDF? Internet Archive should give us some. No, it's unfortunately. So let's see if I can blow this up. No, I cannot. It goes the other way. How about that? But these short little songs, which were used to instruct children, were used in the Anglican Church by Isaac Watts, writer of many famous hymns, specifically addressed at children, addressing the particular circumstances of childhood, trying to inculcate Christian morals into children. I think some of them we'd find rather horrifying now. Blake is obviously satirizing them. I'm not going to take the time to try and demonstrate that here, because that would take me too far away from my purpose here. But he does have these in mind when he writes his own songs. And what we note here is the repetitiveness, the rhyme. Remember when we talked about Romanticism, that it avoids neoclassical poetics, and that means rhyme and rigid meter and so forth. Blake holds on to some of this because children like rhyme and they like repetitiveness. When I say they like and refer to children, I mean young children. As they hit adolescence, not so much. They, in fact, hate the repetition. Adults forget how much they liked repetition when they were children and talk to children as if they were little adults, and that simply doesn't work. So I'm not going to bore you by repeating things and asking you to repeat things, but the children actually adore repetition up to a certain age. They want it again and again and again. And they want it to rhyme as well. If it's got no rhyme, it's not a poem. It's a pretty crappy poem if it doesn't rhyme, they think. So Blake uses this here. You can see the rhyme scheme: wild, glee, child, me, lamb, cheer again, here, pipe, cheer again, here, etc. With some variation, but it's extremely repetitive, very easy to understand, and yet there's a deceptive complexity about many of the poems that an adult will see that a child may not. So let me just read the introduction here, and we will note some interesting things in this. And one of the things that you'll notice is that Blake here not only gives us a poem, but gives us a genesis of evil, surprisingly. Piping down the valleys wild, piping songs of pleasant glee, on a cloud I saw a child, and he laughing said to me, Piper, pipe a song about a lamb. So I piped with merry cheer. Piper, pipe that song again. So I piped. He wept to hear. Drop thy pipe, thy happy pipe. Sing thy songs of happy cheer. So I sung the same again, while he wept with joy to hear. Piper, sit thee down and write in a book that all may read. So he vanished from my sight, and I plucked a hollow reed, and I made a rural pen, and I stained the water clear, and I wrote my happy songs, every child may joy to hear. So the setting here is rural. It's in the presence of what the Romantics laud as nature, which is almost always a unblemished world not marked by human beings. It's the way the modern environmentalist movement likes to portray the wilderness. A wilderness where there's no wildness, it's just pleasant and green and hospitable, which shows that they've never spent any time in the forest at all. In England, they've already probably killed off all the wolves, so they don't have to worry about it. They can wander in the wolves, and that's wonderful. In Canada, you'd get eaten by a bear or attacked by a wolf or just freeze and get lost. You don't get any sense with this with the English Romantics, in part because the English landscape is far more hospitable than ours is, at least in the winter in particular. But it is a pleasant place and almost an Edenic place. I think that's what you can see here. There's an idealization of nature, which is common to Blake, and we will find Wordsworth and Shelley as well, and to some degree Keats. Not so much Byron. Not so much Byron. Byron's not so bothered by that conception of nature. He's interested in other things. But it's pretty stock there that there's a view of nature as an Edenic state, an unfallen world. The narrative of fallenness is an important part of the transition from innocence to experience, by the way. It's not just that there's a change. There's a sense of loss with experience. There's also a sense of gain. This is what makes it a complicated thing. But the loss you can already hear in the original account. So piping down the valleys wild, he sees a child, he's laughing, says, do it again. What are we going to sing? A song about a lamb. It's capitalized. Any Christian reader is going to hear echoes of references to Christ. Probably hears about it in Sunday school. So I piped with merry cheer. Pipe that song again. He did it. He wept to hear. Why is he weeping? Maybe because he hears about what happens to Christ, the Lamb. It's not stated. But the child is already, when at first cheered, now struck by grief of some sort. Again, a sense of the fallenness of the world is already creeping into the poem, even though the child initiates the action. Drop thy pipe, thy happy pipe. Sing thy songs of happy cheer. So I sung the same again, while he wept with joy to hear. Now there's a mixture of grief and joy. Complexity of the world. Children begin with seeing things pretty. The fallenness of the world doesn't make an impression, but it doesn't always make the same impression at the same stage. It depends how early a child experiences grief. But they all eventually do this, and that leads to questions because they have rational minds, even at a young age. They have a sense of moral right and wrong. It leads to grief. Grief is an expression of injustice in some sense. It's not right. At any rate, the child is dictating to the adult what should happen here. Piper, sit thee down and write in a book that all may read. Now, as soon as he does what he is told, you note that the Piper vanishes from my sight, he says. So who's the Piper? I think it's the poet himself. It's the I saw a child, so he's the Piper, the poet is the Piper. And when he does as the child tells him to do, which is to write down the poem, at that point he disappears from the poem. Something's being said about the process of writing. It's unnatural. He's plucked, and note that it becomes even more clear when he plucks a hollow reed and makes a rural pen and stains the water clear and writes these songs down. Now, embedded in this very simplistic account is a hint at the Romantic view of the relation between art and nature. And artifice in nature. And it is one that is characteristic of the period, but it is not characteristic of the history of Western thinking and culture in general. It's an very unusual one, which is the suggestion that art is opposed to nature. A sense that we have held on to this very day. So if I give you an apple and say, or a piece of meat and say it's natural, it's from a cow, or I can say here's a piece of artificial meat, what do they call it? What do they call it? The fake meat that they produce in stores now and give you, and it's the meat substitute. It's beyond meat, which sounds like it's even better than meat. But what it isn't is meat, it's artificial. And I notice when I walk by the shelves that the meat's gone and the beyond meat is still sitting in, it's beyond consumption. Nobody's buying beyond meat. And why is that? They say it tastes great. I have no idea. I won't taste it myself. I don't want to try it. It's not because I have a bias against artificial things, but actually everyone else does. That's the reason. I am against it when it comes to consuming things. I don't want artificial sweeteners. I don't want artificial anything in terms of food. But it's not because I'm opposed to artifice. The apple that I eat has been derived from marrying two apple, like engrafting one type of apple tree with another, and so I get a better tasting fruit as a result. So it is an artificial process. We have involved ourselves, and we don't just take the fruit off the trees. There's something called agriculture, right? Same thing with the pigs and the cows. It's called animal husbandry. You take the animals, you put them together, and you produce better tasting, more productive crops, food, whatever. You can breed out certain qualities. You can breed in certain other qualities. I'm not opposed to that. But that is artificial. That's involvement of art. Now, art is just a way. It's a technique. You're bringing a technique into nature. Is this a wrong thing to do? The Romantics would suggest that any involvement of mankind in nature is ipso facto unnatural, which by one definition it is. It's unnatural. We've interfered with the way things are. However, in the Christian conception, the natural world is not just good, but it's also fallen. And therefore, it's right to try and rectify the wrongs. Also, it's part of the cultural mandate given to Adam and Eve to begin with, to be fruitful and multiply and fill and subdue the earth, and to make the wilderness into a garden. And nobody objected to this. Historically, it was seen as good farming practice. There's an inherent goodness in the natural world, but it can be improved upon. You can make a prettier rose. You can create a different color of rose through breeding and so forth. It can smell better, it can look better, it can be of different colors, etc. Nobody objects to this, but by one standard, that's introducing artifice, and therefore it's unnatural. Nobody objects to that. But if I say something to you and I give it to you to eat and say it's artificial, you will turn your nose up at it. Whereas if I say this is natural, everyone's going to have it. And even more natural is organic. What's the difference between organic and natural? One's natural as opposed to the non-natural natural. It's just a form of marketing, really. except it usually recognizes biocultures underneath it, so the invisible nature that pasteurization and whatever is trying to get rid of. So organic, it's also natural, but it hasn't got rid of the microorganisms. That's what's meant by it, right? Anyway, the point here is not to make a comment about food, it's to talk about our understanding of nature, which we've inherited from the Romantics. We don't use a biblical view of nature. We don't use the view of nature that the ancient world would have used, or any culture would have used, for that matter, which is that it's right to try and domesticate animals. And the animals are not hurt by it. In fact, they benefit from it. It's right to cull the herds, hunting season, to keep problems from occurring. If you don't shoot the wolves will eat up all the animals, and then you have a wolf overpopulation, and then they get sicknesses and diseases, and they come into your community and create other problems. So yes, don't exterminate them all, but by all means make sure that you manage the populations. That's the human involvement in the natural realm. Not wrong. In fact, fundamentally right. But again, there's a limit to it. But the limit is not nature versus artifice, as if nature is correct and artifice is wrong. That's the Romantic conception. Who is influenced by the Romantic conception? Our whole world. So as I said to you at the outset, I think we're all romantics, whether we like it or not. And we shouldn't like it. But it is the basic assumption of the environmental movement in our day. I could go on at great length about that. The poem is not getting into any of that stuff here, but note that it talks about a fall within nature just simply by virtue of writing something down. Now let me say something further about that. In this period, it was very, very common to believe that the best poetry was unwritten poetry. It was an oral tradition. And I mentioned to you as well that the most wise teachers were also held to the same standard, namely Jesus and Socrates, two men who never wrote anything down. Their followers did, and by writing it down, they perverted their teachings. Why? Because as soon as they wrote them down, they codified it, and people tried to follow the word of the law rather than the spirit, and Jesus always followed the spirit, never the word. There's a certain reading of Paul's epistle there. The word killeth or the letter killeth, the spirit giveth life, right? It's taking Scripture. It's an understanding of Scripture. Is it a scriptural understanding of Scripture? No. Because Paul's talking, when he talks about the letter, he's referring to the law as opposed to grace. But in the Romantic period, there's a certain view of writing as a perversion of genius and specifically of the spirit of the artist. As soon as you write something down, you have effectively stained the water clear, and you're losing the inspiration that brought about the poetic, imaginative impulse to begin with. And so, as I say, you will find praises of Jesus and Socrates in the same breath in this period by people who are not Christian, but they laud Jesus for not writing anything down. And you will also hear them praising the bards of ancient peoples who have conveyed a non-written tradition. And one of them is a Celtic bard by the name of Ossian. Has anyone ever heard of Ossian? I might have mentioned him before. Ossian, epic poems published by the Scottish poet James Macpherson. Originally it's Fingal and Tamora. Anyway, allegedly a Gaelic poet. Macpherson was a Scottish academic. He said that he encountered these poems in the songs of the shepherds of Scotland in Gaelic, and he translated them for us, wrote them down. And these were praised all over Europe, the sublime writings of Ossian. In Germany, they particularly adored Ossian. Goethe mentions him. But you'll get it mentioned all over the case. There were some that were skeptical, like Dr. Johnson, but in general received as the most sublime poetry. And then it turned out that Macpherson was a fraud and made it all up. He wrote them, he composed them. And so my question, when the fraud is exposed, and the Ossian poet is none other Macpherson himself, what changed in his reception among his contemporaries? If Ossian was so wonderful when you thought there was an Ossian, how did he become not wonderful when he started being this man, James Macpherson? Either it was good or it wasn't good. Suddenly they dropped the whole thing. And the answer is just simply there's a certain idolization of the natural, uncivilized human being in the Romantic period against the Enlightenment. The Enlightenment's rationalistic, it's civilized, it's highly organized, it's highly abstract, it's mechanized in its processes. Whereas Ossian lives in a world very close to nature, which he expresses in his feelings, which are untutored by others and just come from his natural poetic responses to everything. They will do the same thing with the Bible, by the way. The same sort of perception. In the 18th century, the Oxford professor of poetry produces a volume on the poetry of David and so forth. Specifically, actually, no, is it about Isaiah? No, it's the Psalms. And he talks about how Hebrew poetry does not have any artifice about it. It's natural and sublime in its diction. But it's fundamentally natural. It's passionate, it's evocative, and for that reason it gets translated from one language to the next without any loss. So look at the Psalms in English, and how can you not count them among the best works in any language? Why is that? Well, the explanation is that because they're fundamentally passionate and natural and close to every human being's inner nature. Fundamentally sublime, though. But because they don't have any artifice is the explanation. So they appeal to nature rather than artifice. Likewise, Shakespeare. Shakespeare is the great poet and dramatist. Why? Because he follows the beat of his own drum. He doesn't follow the prescriptions of any other writers. He is his own thing. He follows his own genius. He's not been taught by anyone. Likewise, Mozart, the childhood prodigy, who has taught the 6-year-old Mozart to compose whole compositions. He's a natural. He's a prodigy. He's an original genius. They all are. They're original. It's just something in their nature. They're untaught. And these are then the models, the role models for other artists then, not to follow prescriptions or the teaching of tradition, but to simply listen to their own thoughts and feelings and to express them. These are Romantic ideas, and they hold pretty strongly, actually, for quite a long time. Anyway, this was the first poem, Song of Innocence. Introduction. Let me go to the Song of Experience introduction if I can. There we go. Hear the voice of the bard, who present, past, and future sees, whose ears have heard the holy word that walked among the ancient trees, calling the lapsed soul and weeping in the evening dew, that might control the starry pole and fallen light renew. O earth, return, arise from out the dewy grass. Night is worn, and the morn rises from the slumberous mass. Turn away no more. Why wilt thou turn away? The starry floor, the watery shore, is given thee till the break of day. So whereas on the one hand, we had a child and a piper, and a sign of a fall, but still a relatively, I would say, close to the Edenic state, where it's sort of encapsulated within this. Here we have a voice of a bard, an adult, singing from the perspective of experience and calling upon his knowledge of the holy word, who walked among the ancient trees, maybe a reference to the three visitors that met with Abraham at Mamre, Genesis 17. But he is calling the lapsed soul. So now it's introducing vocabulary that adults don't, that children really have no conception of, but adults start to. A lapsed soul is a fallen soul. And a sense of the fallen light. So in the beginning, the light is fading. Now the light's already fallen, and has a sense of trying to bring it back as his vocation. There's nothing inherently problematic about this introduction. The bard is there to call people to the light. It's a sort of a poetic vocation. But just note the tone, the similarities and the differences. This is also a 5-line, 4-stanza, 5-line poem. The other is a 4-line, 5-stanza. A little bit more complicated. What else shall I go here? Let's look at the echoing green. I'm not going to, no, I won't. How much time have I got? No, I won't. I won't look at the echoing green. I will look at the lamb, just because of time. The lamb, famous, Lamb and the Tiger. This is the song of Innocence. The lamb, little lamb who made thee, does thou know who made thee? Gave thee life and bid thee feed by the stream and o'er the mead, gave thee clothing of delight, softest clothing, woolly, bright, gave thee such a tender voice, making all the vales rejoice. Little lamb, who made thee? Dost thou know who made thee? Little lamb, I'll tell thee. Little lamb, I'll tell thee. He is called by thy name, for he calls himself a lamb. He is meek and he is mild. He became a little child. I a child and thou a lamb. We are called by his name. Little lamb, God bless thee. Little lamb, God bless thee. You can imagine the speaker in this poem being a Christian adult speaking to a child. Because the adult is questioning the child now and directing the child to consider his creator. Questions that the child might ask but doesn't always ask, occasionally, because they're complex metaphysical questions. Where did I come from? And the adult doesn't say from your mother. He gives a more philosophical answer. Entirely correct, but the child isn't asking. Actually, the child isn't asking anything. It's the adult interrogating the child and pushing him to a certain direction. Remember, this is still a song of innocence, but he's going to, in the adult's depiction of this, he is going to associate the child with the lamb, and the lamb here is clearly the Lamb of God, Jesus. He's meek and mild, became a child, and you a lamb, and he a lamb as well. So all sorts of associations here, which with a Christian theological framework make a lot of sense and are very naively expressed. So there's nothing problematic about this. But it is already, there's a sense of, yes, we're using terms of innocence, and yet it's moving in a direction away from the original conception of the introduction. Compare this, note the beautiful engravings here, to the tiger. Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night. Again, the questions. What immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? In what distant deeps or skies burnt the fire of thine eyes? On what wings dare he aspire? What the hand dare seize the fire? And what shoulder and what art could twist the sinews of thy heart? And when thy heart began to beat, what dread hand and what dread feet? What the hammer, what the chain, in what furnace was thy brain? What the anvil, what dread grasp dare its deadly terrors clasp? When the stars threw down their spears and watered heaven with their tears, did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee? Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forest of the night, what immortal hand or eye dare frame thy fearful symmetry? This is the song of experience. We have another created being, entity here. Before we had the lamb, now we have the tiger. He doesn't refer to the lion. It would be an obvious thing to do. He doesn't refer to the lion, but he's referring to a fearsome beast, which does not seem to fit an unfallen world. On the contrary, the tigers eat the lambs if they come upon them. And there's a ferocity and a wildness in the tiger, which suggests a ferocity and an untamed nature of the Creator. These are questions that will be asked in the book of Job. Remember, Job, or God in the book of Job, speaks of creating Leviathan and Behemoth, which sound a lot like dinosaurs, quite frankly. Certainly not like the biblical translators present them as. What do they have them as? Hippopotamus. That's Behemoth. He's a hippopotamus, but he's got a big tail. What are you talking about? It's like a tail that's like a tree. You ever seen a hippopotamus? It's got a little whiskey thing. That's not much of a tail. I can't remember now what Leviathan is. I think it might just be like a whale. Yeah, it doesn't. But not if you read it. I think that doesn't sound like It doesn't sound like a whale, and it doesn't sound like a hippo. You're just guessing because whatever. It sounds like a fearsome, huge beast. And the purpose of the illustration isn't to make reference to dinosaurs. The purpose of the beast is to make reference to something that is terrifyingly large and terrifying to its audience. And yet God made those things. And to say something about God's creative endeavors reflecting a mind and purposes that go beyond the human framework. That's what it's doing. Talk about the eagle, talk about everything, and the whole purpose of the questionings of Job there is to say, who are you to ask me questions? You can't fathom God's designs. And I think Blake does this in this poem. The experience sees that God creates terrifying things as well as cute, cuddly, little fluffy things. Things that will eat us as well as things that we will eat. And one that will bring the stars that threw down their spears, probably a reference to Milton's Paradise Lost and the angels. Yeah, the war in heaven. Blake loved Milton. Probably a reference to that. So again, biblical stories. But here the God now then is not one that is just our friend, but this is a God who is awesome. Ought to bring us to fear and reverence. This is also a postulate of experience. Again, a very different type of experience than the other one. You're going to find he depicts varying types of innocence and varying types of experience, and they don't exactly match up. Let me look at the little black boy. Context. When Blake writes this, he is part of the abolitionist movement. Slavery has not been abolished in the British Empire at this point. Blake, like many of his day, is adamantly opposed to the slave trade and wants to bring it to an end. How Blake does it is through his pen. This is called The Little Black Boy. And the narrative perspective is interesting here. The narrator is the little black boy, and the little black boy is reflecting on his own experience. My mother bore me in the southern wild, and I am black. But oh, my soul is white. White as an angel is the English child, but I am black. as if bereaved of light. My mother taught me underneath a tree, and sitting down before the heat of day, she took me on her lap and kissed me, and pointing to the east began to say, "Look on the rising sun, there God does live, and gives his light, and gives his heat away. And flowers and trees and beasts and men receive comfort and morning joy in the noonday. And we are put on earth a little space that we may learn to bear the beams of love. And these black bodies and this sunburnt face is but a cloud, and like a shady grove. For when our souls have learned to bear the heat to bear, the cloud will vanish, we shall hear his voice, saying, Come out from the grove, my love and care, and round my golden tent like lambs rejoice. Thus did my mother say, and kissed me. And thus I say to little English boy, when I from black and he from white cloud free, and round the tent of God like lambs we joy, I'll shade him from the heat till he can bear to lean in joy upon our Father's knee. And then I'll stand and stroke his silver hair and be like him, and he will then love me. He will then love me. This is one of his best poems in some ways. I think it's very subtle and yet also very powerful. It is told in the form of a little story that a mother tells to her child about why she's why they're black and why the children back in Europe are white. Uses the tenets of Christian theology in it insofar as it talks about it having a black body but a white soul, washed by the blood of the Lamb, right? So we're cleaner than clean. He could talk about the robes of righteousness and clad in white, but he doesn't want to do that here. He wants to talk about the soul, and so about faith in Christ. He has faith, and therefore his soul is white, even though his body is black. But the racism isn't inherent there in the "but I am black as if bereaved of light." That's from the vantage point of the little white European boy. So even though this is a song of innocence, there's already a lot of experience that's crept in here. And the innocence here is of innocence of a lack of awareness of how deeply compromised the European mind is about its own prejudices against the natives of the African country, just because they're black, as if they were subhuman or something like that. Now, Darwinism has not yet crept into European shores, but nonetheless, there are discussions about how advanced the Europeans are vis-a-vis the Africans are, and why that is. Before Darwin codifies it and makes it because they're from different races, and some are superior and others are inferior, and some are prone or are fit for survival and ever less so, there's still a racist subtext to the 18th century because they have different natures. They have different color skin. They have different civilizational advances. From the Romantic vantage point, the native is superior because more natural. He doesn't say that here. However, the wisdom of the little black boy is more Christian than the European who is called Christian. That's clear. He doesn't say it's because he's closer to nature. He does, however, suggest that the little African child is a more Christian, has a more Christian view of life, and is willing to forgive the little white boy, and willing to treat him like a brother. I'll shield him when we come into the presence of God, who is light, because I'm used to bearing brighter sunlight, and therefore he makes an analogy, a false one, that he'll be able to stand closer to God, and the little white boy will be able to stand behind him for a little while until he gets used to the beams of love from God. And then he'll be able to come out, and then he'll love me because I'm protecting him from the light. Naive, childlike logic, but it conveys a powerful message. So a false analogy here between God the light and the rising sun, but it's not that uncommon. God lives there in the land of the rising sun, gives his light, and gives a little story about how we are brought to grow mature through the beams of love. And the conclusion that they are further advanced in this is simply because they have black faces. Therefore more holy. But I'll shade him from the heat till he can bear to lean in joy upon our Father's knee. Note they have a common Father. Then I'll stand and stroke his silver hair and be like him, and he will then love me. So that it's that little word then. He didn't love me before, he was afraid of me, he thought. It's so, the irony is so subtle and yet potent. Compare this to its companion poem in the Songs of Experience. Where is it? Where is the little black boy? Is there a little black boy? I'm not sure. I'll leave it for now. Let me come to the Chimney Sweeper. Times 2. One here and one here. So first here. You know what the chimney sweepers are from Mary Poppins, if you've ever watched it. You have to be the big chimneys in the Victorian, and this is pre-Victorian, but the houses of the wealthy have these enormous chimneys. And the soot from the coal accumulates inside the chimneys, and you get chimney fires because of that, and you get great fires that break out. So if you want to avoid those chimney fires, you have to sweep your chimneys from the inside. And you have to go down them and get it out. And so they send small children down the chimneys to clean them out. And these children are often from very poor backgrounds, sent down before labor laws, and you have children effectively working in occupations that are going to mean an early death for them. That's what being a chimney sweeper meant. So anybody who puts their child down a chimney of a wealthy individual is doing so probably because of poverty. They have no choice in the matter, but it does mean that the child is going to die young. From accident or just simply from inhaling the carbon from it. And in this case, as is so often, they're orphans. When my mother died, I was very young, and my father sold me. This is the Song of Innocence. He's not indicting his father in it. He's just saying it matter-of-factly. That's the innocence in it. Sold me while yet my tongue could scarcely cry. Weep, 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 weep. No, he can't say sweep, but it has the connotations of sadness. Weep, 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 weep. So your chimneys I sweep, and in soot I sleep. There's little Tom Dacre, who cried when his head, that curled like a lamb's back, note again reference to the lamb, was shaved. What did he get his head shaved for? Because otherwise they could never get the soot out of his hair. So they got heads like me. More so. So I said, hush, Tom, never mind it, for when your head's bare, you know that the soot cannot spoil your white hair. And so he was quiet. And that very night, when Tom was asleeping, he had such a sight that thousands of sweepers, Dick, Joe, Ned, and Jack, were all of them locked up in coffins of black. And by came an angel who had a bright key, and he opened the coffins and set them all free, then down a green plain, leaping, laughing they run, and wash in a river, and shine in the sun. Then naked and white, all their bags left behind, they rise upon clouds and sport in the wind. And the angel told Tom, if he'd be a good boy, he'd have God for his father and never want joy. And so Tom awoke, and we rose in the dark and got with our bags and our brushes to work. Though the morning was cold, Tom was happy and warm. So, if all do their duty, they need not fear harm. Don't you like the moral ending? If you're good, you will be acceptable to God and never die. Ours is not to ask, ours is but to do. Right? Don't question, just do it. And do it for the glory of God. And if you be a good boy, then you will never want joy. And so he goes very happy with and content with this message, even though we already see as the reader, there's a discrepant awareness here. The reader is aware of something inherently wrong with this picture. The child accepts it naively. The innocence is in the child, not in the reader. The reader is now disturbed that a child is being sent down into the coal filled chimneys and breathing in the coal dust that will result in his early death. And he knows that he will die, but he's not bothered by it because he's being promised a heavenly reward. Again, the legislation against child labor doesn't come for another 60 years for this sort of action. That is the Song of Innocence. Let's go to the Song of Experience. Note the irony and the satire. Blake is a terrific satirist, like Swift. Chimney Sweeper. There the child was untroubled. Here, a little black thing among the snow, crying, "Weep, weep," in notes of woe. Where are thy father and mother? Say, they are both gone up to the church to pray. Because I was happy upon the heath and smiled among the winter's snow, they clothed me in the clothes of death and taught me to sing the notes of woe. And because I am happy and dance and sing, they think they have done me no injury and are gone to praise God and his priest and king who made up a heaven of our misery. So now it gets savage, right? So you go from the innocent, where we're aware of the wrong, but the child doesn't indict it, to now the child turning against the parents who are exploiting him and going with clear consciences because the child doesn't protest. It has the same effect. Both Chimney Sweepers are getting us to think about it, but there's an edge to the latter poem that comes from experience. This is an older child. There's anger in the voice, and a righteous anger in the voice. The righteous anger in the first poem would only come from the audience, but not the child. But they fit very well together, as you can see. Divine image. To mercy, pity, peace, and love, all pray in their distress, and to these virtues of delight return their thankfulness. For mercy, pity, peace, and love is God our Father dear. And mercy, pity, peace, and love is man, his child, and care. For mercy has a human heart, pity a human face, and love the human form divine, and peace the human dress. Then every man of every clime that prays in his distress prays to the human form divine, love, mercy, pity, peace. And all must love the human form, in heathen, Turk, or Jew. Where mercy, love, and pity dwell, there God is dwelling too. Untroubling, the human image, the human abstract. Pity would be no more if we did not make somebody poor. And mercy no more could be if all were as happy as we. And mutual fear brings peace till the selfish loves increase. Then cruelty knits a snare and spreads his baits with care. He sits down with holy fears and waters the ground with tears. Then humility takes its root underneath his foot. Soon spreads the dismal shade of mystery over his head, and the caterpillar and fly feed on the mystery, and it bears the fruit of deceit, ruddy and sweet to eat, and the raven his nest has made in its thickest shade. The gods of the earth and sea sought through nature to find this tree, but their search was all in vain. There grows one in the human brain. Compare the one to the other. The one's totally unimpeachable, no problems with it, doesn't trouble us in the least. Sounds like all religions are one. The second is a decidedly horrid and cynical portrait of the use of moral religious language to perpetrate wickedness. Greatest crimes are done in the name of virtues. We're going to put you in prison to protect you. For your own sake. How about here? Do you have one that you'd like me to look at that I've missed? I can't go through them all. Let me go to the echoing green then. The green would probably be a reference. In every little village, there's a church and a school and a green. It's the village green. It's where it's like a gathering place in the middle of the village. It's what is meant here. The echoing green. The sun does arise and the children will play on it. The sun does arise and make happy the skies. The merry bells ring to welcome the spring. The skylark and thrush, the bird of the bush, sing louder around to the bell's cheerful sound, while our sports shall be seen on the echoing green. Old John with white hair does laugh away care, sitting under the oak among the old folk. They laugh at our play, and soon they all say, such were the joys when we all, girls and boys, in our youth time were seen on the echoing green. Till the little ones, weary, no more can be merry. The sun does descend, and our sports have an end. Round the laps of their mothers, many sisters and brothers, like birds in their nest, are ready for rest, and sport no more seen on the darkening green. Perspective of old age, on being young. Reflecting on their own mortality, furthermore. It's a darkening green. Their eyes are growing dim, and they sense mortality is on their doorstep. The echoing green, did I have that here as well? I thought I had the echoing green. Am I missing that? Imagining it? I thought it was here. I am crazy. I am. I've lost it. I thought it was here. There's also some that just simply don't have correspondences but jump out and are memorable. I'll read a different one. One of my favorites. London. Blake grew up in London. He's not like Wordsworth, who grew up in the northwest in Cumbria. He didn't spend a great deal of time in the rural regions. He grew up in London. So when he idealizes the natural world, it's almost not from the same extensive experience as Wordsworth has, but rather as a symbol of something else. But here, London, he makes everything of the civilized world that I've just said the Romantic characteristically accuses the civilized world of, which is a lack of civilization. And in particular here, he's going to talk about the charter. A charter is ownership over something. And you can charter a boat, but there's a charter to, well, we have a Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Canada, but it's a declaration of, it's a legal statement about something. It's now a codification of belonging, whereas before it would have been without being stated. Well, now everybody owns every little inch of the ground that belongs to somebody, and it's been commodified. London, I wander through each chartered street, near where the chartered Thames does flow. A mark in every face I meet, marks of weakness, marks of woe. In every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every ban, the mind-forged manacles I hear. How the chimney sweeper's cry every blackening church appalls, and the hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls. But most, through midnight streets I hear, how the youthful harlot's curse blasts the newborn infant's tear, and blights with plagues the marriage hearse. This is the corruption of everything good. It's a portrait of the city as a sort of Babylon the Great. It associates marriage with a hearse. A hearse is used for a funeral, it carries a dead body. Here we get signs of the curse. Remember in the introduction there was a very little sense of the outworking of sin in corrupting the world. Well, now it's so far advanced that it's immediately there. As soon as the child is born, they hear the infant is crying for fear, and its ear is blighted by the curse of his mother, who's a harlot, who has borne a child out of wedlock, and will have to look after the child, and now has to spend more time plying her trade to look after not only herself but her young one. And it's cursing. The city is full of this. And note the repetition in every and every and every. Even here in every ban, if you don't know what this means, you probably don't actually. The banns of marriage, when a couple is going to be married, historically, within the church, people didn't leave their local parish. You didn't travel. You stayed where you were, roughly speaking. And so the banns of marriage are a declaration, a public declaration, to be put out it'd be read in the church, but also put out in pamphlets and so forth. This person is going to marry this person. So it's declaring that anyone, if there are any objections to this, does this person have a history that this other person needs to know about? And then you declare it, you put it out, and then the third time, and if anyone has any objections why this marriage should not take place, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. That's the end of it, right? Those are the banns of marriage. Even in there is the mark of weakness and marks of... So a ban of marriage is a time of a celebratory event. And yet even there, the marks of weakness and woe are present. In the birth of a newborn child, an innocent little child, comes into the sounds of his mother cursing his birth. And here's mind-forged manacles, not liberty, not freedom, not goodness, but chains. The chains that charter the streets and charter the Thames and lead to the cries of chimney sweepers, whom we've already looked at, and the blackness in the church, referring, of course, to the soot on the outside that makes the chimneys, the outer surface black, but a reflection of what's going on in the teaching within them. It's a very bleak picture. Unforgettable. One of the great poems in English in many ways. And there is an intensification. It's in every and every and every, but most the youthful harlot, prostitution, unwanted children, and even marriage, associated now not with life and hope, but with death and curse. Blake's beloved London. The vantage point of the Romantic towards civilization. I don't live in London in the 18th century, so it might be it might be a very accurate depiction of how bad things were. And I think based on historical accounts, there's some reason for that to be so. Even things like the institution of the church is not associated with good things, but rather with perverse, corrupt things. You can see why people like Blake. I'm going to read on another sorrow, and then I'm going to read the last one. This is the Song of Innocence. But this is the last of them. Note the progression, how they get darker. So it's not just the two contrary states. It's not white and black. It's white, gray, towards black, and then. Can I see another's woe and not be in sorrow too? Can I see another's grief and not seek for kind relief? Can I see a falling tear and not feel my sorrow's share? Can a father see his child weep, nor be with sorrow filled? Can a mother sit and hear an infant groan, an infant fear? No, no, never can it be. Never, never can it be. And can he, capital H, God, who smiles on all, hear the wren with sorrows small, hear the small bird's grief and care, hear the woes that infants bear, and not sit beside the nest, pouring pity in their breast, and not sit the cradle near, weeping tear on infant's tear, and not sit both night and day, wiping all our tears away? Oh no, never can it be. Never, never can it be. He doth give his joy to all. He becomes an infant small. He becomes a man of woe. He doth feel the sorrow too. Think not thou canst sigh a sigh, and thy Maker is not by. Think not thou canst weep a tear, and thy Maker is not near. Oh, he gives to us his joy, that our grief he may destroy. Till our grief is fled and gone, he doth sit by us and moan. Isn't it terrific? Whatever his heterodoxy with respect to the Christian faith, in some ways Blake is closer to it than almost any writer you'll find. Like in this in particular. The compassion, a man of sorrows, right? Took on human nature, became a child. The incarnation, the atonement, Blake is right there. He's got this. Terrific poem. And so apparently artless. This is the beauty of it. It seems so easy to read and easy to understand. A child could understand that and be moved by it. Voice of the Ancient Bard. This is the last of the songs of experience. We've already heard from the bard. Youth of delight, come hither and see the opening morn. Image of truth newborn. Doubt is fled and clouds of reason. Dark disputes and artful teasing. Folly is an endless maze. Tangled roots perplex her ways. How many have fallen there? They stumble all night over bones of the dead, and feel they know not what but care, and wish to lead others where they should be led. Voice of Blake himself, perhaps. Has less potency than many of the other poems. I find the Songs of Innocence and Experience terrific. Like they're just very, very different than the other poets on the course. And you can see why Blake, when he speaks about the Bible as the great code of Western art, has used the Bible and its images and its ideas to fill his own vision. See, this is what I love about Blake and think that is worthy of our admiration, is that he genuinely seems to get to the heart of the matter and express it in plain, clear, simple, easy language, in many ways in the ways in which Jesus himself teaches. He's not trying to be clever. There's a subtlety to it, but it's not an educated subtlety. You want to read it and read it again, and but again, even the first reading is already pretty clear to you what he's saying and what he's not saying. A child can understand it. Oh, there it is, the divine image. A divine image. Oh, I already read this. No, I didn't. I read a human abstract. Cruelty has a human heart, and jealousy a human face, terror the human form divine, and secrecy the human dress. The human dress is forged iron, the human form a fiery forge, the human face a furnace sealed, the human heart its hungry gorge. It's called a divine image, but this is the person made in the image of God, and what do we do with this? It's a terrible indictment of the wickedness of humanity. I like the fact that he sees the depravity of human beings and is not going to varnish it and say it's something that it's not. He's going to condemn sin. I like this about Blake. It makes him a great satirist. He's not going to say it's the divine. It's a divine image. Note that it's not the divine image, but this is a human being. Bears the image of God, and it's a human heart. It's not God's heart. We've just seen God's heart, how God's heart is. It's compassion. He's there with the baby, the wren, right, and the smallest, and with every tear. What we have as distinctively human as opposed to God is the cruelty and jealousy and terror and secrecy and all the things that mark the city of London. So I'm not sure about Blake's analogy or analysis of the origin of evil, and I'm not sure about his use of Lockean psychology. Well, I should say I'm quite clear that I think it's fundamentally wrong, but I think his poetry is better than his conceptualizing. And the songs of Innocence and Experience in particular are terrific. Any comments or thoughts? I think I'm out of time here. You can see why is this not read in Canadian schools? I don't know. It's so good. Anyway, I'll leave it for now.